3:14 a.m. The graveyard shift. This is the hour when the city stops pretending to be civilized, when the shadows stretch out and the real monsters come out to play. The lobby of the Psychotel was silent, save for the rhythmic, drowning percussion of the rain battering against the reinforced glass doors. I was watching the monitors, the black and white grid that shows me the hidden veins of this building, when I saw him. Guest 402. He didn't come through the front door like a man looking for a bed. He came up from the basement garage, from the dark, damp belly of the concrete structure. But he didn't step out of the elevator immediately. The car arrived at the lobby level. The bell chimed, the doors slid open, and he just stood there. I watched him on camera 4. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't checking his watch. He was staring directly at his own reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. For 20 minutes, let that sink in. 20 minutes of absolute stillness, broken only by the terrifying mechanical movements of his face. I watched a man manually construct a human personality from scratch. He would bare his teeth, stretching his lips wide, then let his face go slack and dead, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Then he would try again. A little less teeth, a little more crinkle in the eyes. He was calibrating. He was adjusting the tension in his jaw and the tilt of his head, checking the angles, making sure the mask was tight enough to hide whatever rot lay underneath. It wasn't vanity. Vanity is preening. This was engineering. You see, most people smile because they feel something. Joy, amusement, nervousness. It's a reflex, a spark that jumps from the brain to the muscles, without a layover in the conscious mind. But for a man like this, a smile is a foreign language he has to translate in real time. He was practicing the mimicry of innocence. He was building a camouflage to wear in front of me. In front of the cameras, in front of the world. Watching him rehearse that expression was like watching a snake shed its skin, revealing something cold and ancient beneath. It triggered a primal alarm in the back of my skull, the lizard brain screaming that a predator was at the gate. Finally, satisfied with the curvature of his lips, he stepped out of the elevator and walked toward the reception desk. The transition was jarring. He moved with a practiced fluidity, a man comfortable in expensive fabrics. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, tailored to perfection. But the illusion shattered the moment he crossed the threshold of my sensory range. As he approached the marble counter, the air around him changed. Beneath the heavy, spicy notes of an expensive cologne, there was a sharp chemical undercurrent, undeniable stinging scent of the industrial bleach. And then I looked down. His shoes, Italian leather Oxfords, were ruined, caked into the welts, and smeared across the heels was thick, red clay mud, wet, heavy, and completely out of place for a man coming from a subterranean concrete garage. He had been digging, he had been scrubbing, and now he was standing in front of me, wearing that freshly manufactured smile, waiting for me to validate his disguise. "Good evening," he said. The voice was a rich baritone, smooth like aged whiskey, perfectly calibrated to disarm. But as he spoke, that practiced smile remained fixed on his face, like a rigid plastic mold. It didn't fluctuate, and it didn't fade at the corners when he stopped talking. It just sat there, pinned to his skull, aggressively pleasant. This is what we call the uncanny valley in the flesh, the zone where something looks almost human. But the subtle micro-expressions are missing, triggering a deep biological revulsion. When a genuine human smiles, the skin around the eyes crinkles. It's involuntary. But the skin around his eyes remained smooth, tight, and utterly dead. He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing an obstacle. He was calculating the variables of our interaction, monitoring my heart rate, my gaze, my suspicion level, all while maintaining that terrifying, frozen grin. I reached for the registration tablet, my eyes drifting to the large, black, hard-shell suitcase at his side. It was massive, the kind intended for transatlantic voyages, not a single night at a roadside hotel. His hand was clamped around the handle with a white-knuckled intensity, the tendons in his forearm taut like steel cables. "Let me have the porter take that for you," I offered, reaching out. The reaction was instantaneous and feral. He didn't just decline, he flinched. His body snapped between the bag and me. A physical barrier erected in a nanosecond. "No," he said, too loudly, the baritone cracking just enough to reveal the hiss underneath. Then, realizing his mistake, he adjusted the mask. He forced a chuckle, dry as bone. "I have sensitive documents. I prefer to keep it with me." The bag didn't hold documents. Paper has a specific sound when it rolls, a light, shuffling vibration. As he shifted his stance, the suitcase dragged across the marble floor with a dense, wet thud. It had a sickening gravity to it, a weight that didn't distribute evenly. Whatever was inside was heavy, soft, and shifting. I watched his knuckles, noting the faint pink abrasions across the dorsal side, fresh scratches, likely from brush or fingernails. He caught me looking. For a split second, the smile vanished completely. The video feed in my mind replayed his elevator rehearsal. Teeth, no teeth. Eyes, no eyes. In that moment of silence, the rehearsal failed. The mask slipped. He stared at me with cold, dead eyes of a shark sensing blood in the water. It wasn't fear I saw in him. It was assessment. He was deciding if I was a problem he could talk his way out of, or a problem he would have to remove physically. He handed me his credit card. His fingers were ice cold when they brushed mine, and I smelled the bleach again, stronger now, radiating from his pores, as he began to sweat under the lobby lights. He didn't blink. That's another tell. Normal people break eye contact to recall information or to reduce social pressure. Liars and predators maintain it. They think that staring into your soul proves their honesty, but it only proves their dominance. He watched me type, watched me swipe the card, watched the printer spit out his room key. He was vibrating with a contained energy, a coiled spring waiting to release. When I finally slid the key card across the counter and told him the elevator was to his left, he didn't say, "Thank you." He just took the plastic card, turned on his heel, and began the arduous task of dragging that heavy, silent suitcase toward the lift, the wheels groaning under the weight of his secrets. So, what did guest 402 actually do? To understand the crime, you have to understand the man. The elevator rehearsal gave it away immediately. He is what we call an organized, high-functioning psychopath. He possesses zero effective empathy. He cannot feel your pain, your fear, or your sorrow. He can only simulate the appropriate reactions to manipulate you. That 20-minute session in the mirror wasn't vanity. It was the drafting of a defense strategy. He wasn't practicing a smile for me. He was practicing the mask of the grieving husband. For the press conference he intends to hold in 24 hours. He was calibrating his facial muscles to display shock and tragedy, so that when the police ask where his wife is, he looks like a victim, rather than the monster who ended her. The physical evidence tells the story of an intimate, violent struggle, likely strangulation. This wasn't a crime of passion. In the traditional sense, it was a crime of control. Strangulation is personal. It requires time, sustained physical effort, and a terrifying proximity to the life leaving the victim's eyes. The scratches on the back of his hands are defense wounds, the desperate clawing of a partner, realizing too late that the marriage was a death sentence. The red clay on his shoes and the smell of bleach suggest he has already attempted a cleanup. At the primary crime scene, the marital home, before panicking or realizing he needed a secondary location to stage the disposal. The heavy bag doesn't contain clothes. It contains the only witness to his true nature, folded into a shape the human body was never meant to take. But the most chilling detail came 10 minutes after he entered his room. He called the front desk. He didn't ask for extra towels or a wake-up call. He ordered room service, a 20-ounce ribeye steak, cooked rare, with all the sides. This is a phenomenon known as the parasympathetic rebound, the act of murder. Specifically, the intense physical and adrenaline-fueled exertion of taking a life. Burns a massive amount of caloric energy once the threat is neutralized and the body is hidden. The killer's nervous system swings from a fight-or-flight state into a deep, primal recovery mode. He isn't pacing the floor in guilt. He isn't vomiting from the horror of what he's done. He is ravenous. He is sitting in that room just feet away from the suitcase that holds his wife, eating a bloody steak with the appetite of a man who just finished a hard day at the gym. He checked into this hotel not to sleep, but to stabilize. He needed a neutral ground to wash the rest of the clay from his skin, to digest his meal, and to perfect the narrative he's about to feed the world. The smile in the elevator was the final piece. He was resetting his baseline. He knew that for the next few weeks, he would have to play the role of his life. He had to make sure that when he smiled at the cameras, the world saw a broken heart. Not the predator who was currently wiping steak juice from his chin while his wife's body cooled in a Samsonite tomb. 7 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to scrape against the skyline, bleaching the gray out of the city and replacing it with a harsh, unforgiving light. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black. I was counting the cash drawer, eager to hand the shift over to the day clerk and wash the night off my skin. When the elevator chimed one last time, guest 402 stepped out. The transformation was complete. The disheveled, mud-stained creature who had dragged a corpse through my lobby 4 hours ago was gone. In his place stood a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine spread. He was showered, shaved, and wearing a fresh shirt. The heavy, suffocating smell of bleach had vanished, replaced entirely by the crisp scent of cedar and citrus. He looked rested. He looked clean. He looked human. But the most important detail was what was missing. The massive, hard-shell suitcase was gone. He walked to the desk with a terrifying lightness, his hands swinging freely at his sides, unburdened by the dead weight of his marriage. Somewhere between the steak dinner and the sunrise, he had slipped out the back exit, located a dumpster, a river, or a patch of wet cement, and divested himself of the evidence. The sensitive documents he was so worried about were now decomposing in the dark, while he stood before me, checking out with the casual indifference of a man who had simply enjoyed a good night's sleep. He didn't ask for a receipt. He didn't ask for a taxi. He simply slid the room key across the marble, the plastic worm from his pocket, and nodded. And then he did it. He smiled. It was the exact same smile I had watched him engineer in the elevator reflection. The same lift of the cheekbones, the same calculated exposure of teeth, the same dead, glassy eyes. But this time, I understood its purpose. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of reassurance. He was testing the product one last time before taking it to the market. He walked out the front doors and into the morning light, disappearing into the city he had just defiled, blending perfectly into the crowd of commuters and early risers. He was a wolf in a bespoke suit, and the sheep didn't even look up from their phones as he passed. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I knew what I had seen, but I also knew how the world works. Without the body, without the bag, I was just a tired night clerk with an overactive imagination. But later that evening, I sat in the break room and turned on the local news. And there he was, guest 402. He was standing on his front lawn, surrounded by microphones and flashing cameras, looking straight into the lens. He was wearing the same charcoal suit. He was holding a photo of a beautiful, smiling woman. And then he arranged his face. He pulled the strings he had tightened in my elevator. He looked at the camera with that practiced, tragic expression, the one he had spent 20 minutes perfecting in the mirror, and pleaded for his beloved wife to come home. The world saw a grieving husband. I saw the rehearsal. And as you walk through your life, smiling at strangers, shaking hands, and trusting the faces you see, ask yourself this: how long did they spend in the mirror this morning, making sure their mask wouldn't slip?